How did your relationship with Elton John begin?
We both knew each other because we were both discovered by this wonderful gentleman, Long John Baldry again. He discovered both of us. Wow. And we remained friends when we both lived in England. We lived, like half an hour, 20 minutes apart. And we used to see each other at Christmas, and we were good mates. We used to knock about with each other.
You and the bands you played with, and for that matter, you yourself, you had a reputation of being a heller. For example, I have a note here somewhere, a bill from a Holiday Inn, a large bill saying you wrecked their rooms all over the country.
Well, we attempted to. This was during the days with the Faces, and we were treated rather badly by the Holiday Inns. So we took our revenge on, removing all the furniture from the room and put it in the elevator and sending it down. We did a little bit of damage, nothing I'm proud of, but it does make me smile. But the best story is they banned the Faces, right? We weren't very well known, but then we'd check in as Fleetwood Mac, and because they weren't particularly well known, so they didn't know we were still checking into Holiday Inns as Fleetwood Mac.
But did you have a drink problem at one time?
No, not really. If there's one element I could probably curb, I've never been really a drug person. I do adore my wines, and I drink 3 glasses a night, 7 nights of the week, and I think it's good for me. I can't have, I don't know about you, Dan, I can't have a great dinner, right, with a glass of water. I have to have my wine.
Well, did you ever have a drug problem, a real drug problem?
No, never been to rehab, never had a problem with it. I delved a little into it, but it used to get in the way of my playing football, because I played football sometimes Saturdays and Sundays in a competitive league, and then I would train during the week, so I never had time for that,
What's the most humorous thing that's happened to you? You've had all these performances on every continent, with the possible exception of Antarctica. What's the funniest thing that happened to you?
Oh man, that's one thing I do remember is when I was in the Faces. We always have to have women throwing themselves at us. They'd be at the Holiday Inns or whatever hotel we were checking into, and I went up to my room once. And I don't know if you're going to be able to broadcast this. I went up to my room once and throw my cases on the chair and locked the door and went to the small room to do some business and took my trousers down, and then behind the shower curtain I heard a rustling and a giggling, and 2 girls had actually got into the shower room, into my room. So I went, who's in there? Pulled my trousers up and there was 2 girls.
I have a quote here from Rolling Stone magazine, a review in 1980. This takes us back quite a ways, which I want to quote to you. It says, Rolling Stone, quote, "Rarely has a singer had as full and unique a talent as Rod Stewart. Rarely has anyone betrayed his talent so completely. Once the most compassionate presence in music, he has become a bilious self-parody and sells more records than ever."
I suppose that's true. I know who wrote that. What was his name? He never liked me, this guy who wrote that. He's always been criticised. I think he's passed on now. But that was, I think, 1979 when I recorded Do You Think I'm Sexy?
Right, 1979-80.
Yeah, 1979-80. Yeah. When I recorded Do You Think I'm Sexy, which is probably the most popular song that I've ever recorded, they thought I had left rock and roll. I was a traitor to rock and roll because I recorded a disco song. Was I jumping on the bandwagon? Yes. And what's wrong with that? Was it a huge hit? Amazingly huge hit. And do people still like it? Of course they do. So f*** him.
I take your point. And I don't blame you for 1 second. But, one person's selling out, quote, is another person's adjusting to the time and surviving. Yeah. And frankly, looking back on it, it was very smart. I'm not saying you did it for this purpose. But disco seemed to rule the music world there for a small window in the 1970s. Yeah. And so it had been pretty foolish not to adjust with the time.
Yeah, of course. It's I must admit that part of that song I did borrow from a big Brazilian hit, so I can't take all credit for it, but I'd just come back from Brazil, from the festival there, you know, and this song was on my mind. And then a few months later I went into the studio and started singing that melody, and I wrote the lyrics. And there was plagiarism in the first degree. But I did cough up, and all the money went to charity. Mm-hmm. So I went off at a tangent there. Sorry, Dan, what was the question?
No, I want to get back to the question. You answered the question, which was you adjust with the times. You can't be blamed for saying to yourself, look, disco's big. I can do that. And ring with it. But you mentioned you were just back from Brazil at one point. Now, you played in Brazil in Rio before what some people think is the largest crowd ever to hear somebody in live rock and roll concert. Some of the estimates say 3.5 million people. Other estimates say 5 million people. I can't imagine performing before a crowd that large. One, did you realize the crowd was that large?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think in the Guinness Book of Records it says 4.9.
All right, all right.
You've been to Brazil?
I have.
Yeah. Well, you know, the bay, it goes all the way around the Horseshoe Bay.
Right.
Well, they closed off all the roads, and at every 110 yards, something like that, there was a monitor screen, and there were speakers, and it went all the way around the beach. It was so massive. By the time I'd sung the last note of whatever song I was singing, it had just got to the people on the other side of the beach. It was extraordinary. It really was. It's one of those concerts, obviously, I'd never forget for the rest of my life.
And that was what year?
93, 94, perhaps.
Yeah. Let's talk about your look. How did the hair come about?
After I'd become a beatnik and my dad had told me to smarten up my act and start bathing, I became what was known as a mod in the 60s, you know, and all the guys had their hair sort of like this, but back combed up, huge. And it came, I believe, out of France, out of Paris, where the guys were doing it there. And it was really huge. We all looked like Dusty Springfield, you know.
Right.
So that's how it came about. And I'm so glad it's still on the top of my head to this day.
You mentioned Maggie May earlier. Talk about what the song's about and what the process was in putting it down and creating it.
It's a really interesting. I mean, Maggie May obviously turned my whole life around. It was about my first sexual encounter, which lasted about 3 seconds and left a stain. Maggie was a large woman that I met at a festival, jazz festival.
In about what year?
I would say 1964, something like that. I was a teenager.
And how old was she?
She was definitely older than me and larger than me, and it all occurred in a tent.
So she was there to introduce you to the pleasures of an older woman.
She was, yes. And she was during the day, Dan, and she dragged me into her tent and took advantage of me, and it was all over in 3 seconds, as I said, and that was I don't know if her name was Maggie. It could have been Rosie, I don't know, but that's loosely what the song was based on.